The Queen of Executions and mature heroine of Persona 3, Mitsuru Kirijo, otherwise known as Mommy by some people on the internet, is easily a fan favorite character in the Persona series, and it's pretty easy to see why. While many people may not be able to relate to her position, she's just as well written as the other members of S.E.E.S, and she has a charm to her no one else in the game has. In this video, I'll be going over her growth as a character, and as always, I'll also be giving additional context by going in detail about the mythology and reasoning of her persona and arcana as well. I don't want to take too much of your time, so let's go ahead and get into the background of Mitsuru and learn more about her. Mitsuru is a third-year student at Gekkoukan High, and not only that, she's also the student council president and is the daughter of the group that owns it, that being the Kirijo group. She's very reserved, calm, mature, and logical, more so than anyone else in S.E.E.S by far. Her formalness is a result of her status as a member of the Kirijo group, which is one of the biggest names in the Personaverse. Her formalness, while not necessarily a bad trait, makes her seem unapproachable and cold, as pointed out by Yukari many times throughout the game. Despite this unapproachable aspect about her, she sees everyone around her as equal no matter the status, gender, or anything else of the sort. I normally don't mention the female route in these videos since I plan to do something separate for it, but in that round of the game when Kotone is appointed as the leader, Junpei tries to say he should be the leader since he's the only guy in the group that can fight right now. But Mitsuru makes it clear there is no tolerance for prejudice based on someone's gender. So she's unapproachable despite being very kind and willing to stand up for those around her. And since she's been raised differently than her peers, she really doesn't even know what to do to remedy this aspect of her. This is shown by her social link in moments like her thinking Junpei's room got robbed for being messy. It's important to know that the biggest problem Mitsuru has throughout the game, at least internally, is trying to balance her status in the Kirijo group with things like her friendships, which can explain why she was given the Empress Arcana. The Empress Arcana is the third major Arcana card and represents power over life, dominance, growth over the natural world, prosperity, protection, comfort, mothers, and more. This also fits Mitsuru pretty well because she's kind of like the mom of S.E.E.S, so to speak. She always has to look out for those in the group, like keeping Akihiko from fighting while injured, making sure everyone studies and sleeps well, and things like that. The Empress Arcana in Persona specifically is usually reserved for well-established female characters that are well-known figures in the universe, like Mitsuru and Haru, and the two that aren't as popular as them like Yukino and Margaret still embody much of the Arcana's meaning. Mitsuru in particular has to work around her place of authority, the loss of her father, the fate of her company like the Kirijo group, and her love life with her unwanted fiancé. The way she initially tries to cope with all of these things is by doing everything on her own. She has trouble placing her trust in people, and as a result tends to be disconnected from those around her, which is the main reason Yukari takes such offense to the things she does. She can come off as using everyone, and the only person she's really close to for the vast majority of the game is Akihiko, since they have known each other for so long. Another thing I feel is cool and noteworthy about Mitsuru, while not totally important to her character, is her main design. Mitsuru's school outfits are easily the most formal, mature, and professional out of anyone else's. She has a long skirt, long boots, and doesn't wear her jacket. Despite this though, it blends in well with the other students, which is very fitting for Mitsuru I feel. But hold up, what is that?
You should like and subscribe.
Huh, looks like Mitsuru knows what's up. The last thing I need to mention before going in depth on her persona, and I probably should have mentioned this first, is her position in S.E.E.S. As we learn throughout the game, the reason she desires to end the Dark Hour so badly is because her grandfather was the reason the Dark Hour even exists, and the initial experiments with the shadows were held at Gekkoukan High. This eventually led to Yukari's father, who was a researcher for Mitsuru's grandfather, to sacrifice himself to prevent the fall from coming. Her main motive for fighting above all else though, is to protect her father. In her own words, once everything with the Dark Hour occurred, he had the look of a dead man. She became a Persona user in the first place to protect him, and she was actually the very first person in S.E.E.S to become a Persona user. She keeps all of this hidden from the others initially, which leads to a conflict, but we'll get there in due time. With the main gist of her backstory covered, we can go in detail on her first tier persona, which is Penthesilea. Penthesilea was an Amazonian queen in Greek mythology who assisted Troy during the Trojan War, and there was even an asteroid named after her. The main way Persona 3 Reload describes her is based upon her death at the hand of Achilles, who was the greatest of all the Greek warriors. Penthesilea fought Achilles and was slain, but once he took off her mask and saw her face, he shared remorse and regret for killing her. To be honest, I don't blame him because Mitsuru is definitely beautiful, so if she looked anything like that, then I can sympathize. In another depiction of her as written by Quintus Smyrnius, she had accidentally killed another queen of the Amazonians, which caused her so much grief that she wanted nothing but death, so she rushed herself into the Trojan War. Her alongside the other Amazonians put up such a fierce fight it had the Greek army stunned, and Penthesilea herself took down dozens of them on their own. Her comrades around her were slain, but the fierce fight she put up against the army inspired the young Trojan women watching to join the fight as well. This led to a speech from someone watching stating that women are equal to men. Like I mentioned a moment ago, Mitsuru is willing to stand up for everyone and sees everyone equally, so I think this represents her very well. Not to mention the fact that Mitsuru does get a lot of enjoyment out of fighting, just not in the same way someone like Akihiko does. In her case, it's kind of like a switch that goes on and off and she keeps it to herself. The fact she's so adamant about fighting against the shadows and the Dark Hour, and the way she inspires those around her to do better, embodies Penthesilea's fighting spirit and infectious tenacity perfectly no matter which depiction of her you look at least in my opinion. She makes sure everyone does well in school, she makes sure no one puts themselves in danger, and generally just looks out for everyone's well-being in general, which is why the mother aspect of the Empress arcana is so fitting. Alright, with her persona and backstory covered, we can get into the main events of Persona 3's narrative. From the very first time you see Mitsuru, you can get a good idea of how she is as a person. As Makoto arrives at the dorm during the Dark Hour for the first time, Yukari panics when she sees him, but Mitsuru on the other hand calmly greets him as if nothing happened. She's aware of the fact he has the potential of Persona, and she's pretty unfazed by most things or people. The main dynamic between herself and Yukari is something that drives the both of them to grow together. Like I mentioned before during the backstory section, Yukari and Mitsuru are very interconnected in many ways. Their families work together during the experiments on the shadows, and they now work together to fight against the results of those experiments. They aren't very close at all at first, and Yukari harbors some ill will toward her for the majority of the game for a few different reasons, but it's just something to keep in mind since it's so important to both of their character arcs. Back to the story though. On April 9th during the Dark Hour, Mitsuru and the others are keeping tabs on Makoto to observe his potential, but then an attack on the dorm occurs. In this moment, the other defining characteristic of Mitsuru is shown, and that is her leadership capabilities. As soon as Akihiko arrives at the dorm and the attack starts escalating, she quickly gives orders to everyone, and again the difference between her and the others becomes clear. She doesn't panic at all, and this is mainly due to the fact she's already fought the shadows before. Throughout the entire game, she basically acts as the leader to the group. Even though Makoto is technically the leader and decides when they do things like go to Tartarus, she's usually the one who does everything else. If there's a meeting that needs to be had, she's generally the one to call it into action, and she'll decide things for the group like making them go to summer school to catch up on studies they might have missed due to the work they do in S.E.E.S. It's why I described her as the mom of the group, because she really does do a lot in that regard. Going past that full moon operation, since I've covered what I needed to for Mitsuru during it, I'd like to go onward to around the Fuka rescue operation. There was one major thing I want to point out here since it proves something I said earlier in the video, and that's the fact that Mitsuru does actually care for those around her, just in case the points I've made haven't been adequate enough. When they have the meeting to discuss what to do for Fuka, who is trapped in Tartarus, this discussion occurs.
With this, if something goes wrong, you could all end up lost in Tartarus too. But alright, we know it's risky, but we also can't just leave her there.
I think this shows the fact that despite the fact she's logical to a fault at times, when it comes to something as grave as rescuing a person, she's willing to take risks for the sake of helping someone. It shows she isn't as selfish or cold as she might seem. She just doesn't even realize she's doing anything wrong by isolating herself from the others early on into the game. Just to show how isolated and disconnected she really is, when Junpei says it's all set to go in regards to him unlocking the door for them to infiltrate the school in the same way Fuka did, she thinks he's talking about a damn bomb. Now, to be honest, this was probably more so for comedic effect, but with how she acts in regards to other topics in the game, I think it's pretty in line for her as a character. Besides that discussion between herself and the others, the next thing I want to focus on is around July in-game, right before they go on the trip to Yakushima Beach. You might be wondering why I'm jumping such a large amount of time in the game, and that's a good question. Normally, I would go to each full moon operation and explain their significance during it, but to be honest, I don't think we need to do that for Mitsuru. The thing about Mitsuru is, like I said, she's very reserved and she isolates herself since she wants to do everything on her own. So until something occurs that shakes that up, there really isn't anything major to go over. Now, don't get it twisted, this isn't me saying she's not a good character or anything until this point in the game, but for analysis purposes, I'd be running in circles wasting your time, and I don't want to do that because it's boring as hell. I just wanted to explain this to clear up any confusion. Anyway, with that small tangent or disclaimer, if you will, out of the way, we arrive before the Yakushima Beach trip. On July 11th, the team have a meeting to discuss the previous Dark Hour, and this is where the lid of Yukari's disdain for Mitsuru kind of blows off the top. She confronts Mitsuru about everything regarding Tartarus and the Dark Hour and how she feels she's been hiding the truth from them. Which, if you recall what I said previously during the backstory, that's an accurate assessment of the situation. Mitsuru claims she didn't necessarily mean to hide the truth, but a chance for her to say it never came about. Which, to be honest, I think is total cap, but it does sort of make sense considering her character. Realistically speaking, she doesn't totally understand people's emotions too well because of her upbringing in isolation, so it's possible she really just didn't think it was the biggest deal to tell them unless she saw an actual opportunity to do so. Whether or not that was a good call or not is besides the point, but I digress. The main reason she didn't want to tell anyone, realistically speaking though, is because she just felt guilty. She reveals everything about how her grandfather conducted the experiments at the school 10 years ago, but conveniently leaves out the part about Yukari's father. To be honest, I can't really blame her for wanting to keep everything hidden considering how embarrassing and awful the whole situation is. It's easy to say from a third-person view that she should have just told everyone sooner, but it's not that simple when it comes to matters of the heart. So now that everyone knows the truth, instead of trying to act like all she said never happened, the very next day she takes initiative and tries to right her wrongs. She asks Fuka to look into the events from 10 years ago and even provides her with her own ID and password to get access to the Kirijo group database so that Fuka wouldn't get in trouble if something somehow went wrong. Every character in Persona 3 has some sort of event that pushes them toward their first steps of growth, and in my eyes, this is Mitsuru's. From this point onward in the game, she would become more self-aware of how she acts in regards to her bonds with S.E.E.S and the work they do. Another important moment for her is during the Yakushima trip starting on July 20th. So let's go ahead and travel there. After everybody has fun at the beach for the day, they return to what is basically the mansion Mitsuru's father has down there to rest, at which point Mitsuru and her dad have their first real interaction of the whole game, and it leads to one of my favorite pieces of dialogue in the entire game actually. Take a listen.
I heard you told them about the incident. Why did you hide it for so long?
I wasn't hiding it.
I've told you time and again, none of the blame is yours.
But...
Two in harmony surpasses one in perfection. That has been our guiding principle since the Kirijo family separated from the Nanjo group. You must learn to trust in others, Mitsuru. There are things in this world that cannot be accomplished alone, no matter how many sacrifices you make.
I understand.
Her father's words are something she took to heart for sure, because slowly but surely she begins to realize she can't rely solely on herself, so this is a lot more important than it might seem. After that though, her father says he knows she accessed the database, so he resolves to go ahead and tell everyone the truth of what had happened 10 years ago during those experiments, which reveals something else that is quite interesting. When her father says that the reason the experiments were being made initially was to create a time manipulation device, Mitsuru herself shows that she wasn't aware of the true intentions behind it all. This shows that while not as out of the loop as everyone else, there were things that were hidden from her all this time as well. It's not too important for her character arc, but it is an interesting detail. More importantly though, once it's revealed that Yukari's father was seemingly responsible for the Dark Hour, Tartarus, and the death of many people, this results in her snapping at Mitsuru for hiding this from her. This is the climax of their tension together, and they can barely be around each other for a while after this. And I mean, it's pretty clear to see why. I don't think I really need to explain that. That's all I want to cover for the Yakushima beach trip, so let's just give a quick rundown of where Mitsuru is right now. Even though her relationship with Yukari has worsened, she's on the better steps for growth now. She's being more honest with the group and is beginning to value them more and more. She's still overly independent, but she's able to acknowledge this shortcoming of hers to an extent from this point onward, although it wouldn't become apparent until a bit later on in the game. Now the next important thing is one of my favorite parts of the entire game, and that is regarding Shinjiro's linked episodes. Mitsuru plays a vital role in these, and it gives insight on what her, Akihiko, and Shinji were doing during the early days of the Tartarus visits, before Shinji had accidentally killed Ken's mother. These linked episodes start around September 4th, and the first one begins with Mitsuru asking you to give Shinji his re-enrollment form for school. During the second one, we get to see Mitsuru and Shinji have a serious talk. Mitsuru tries to pressure Shinji into returning to school, and when he still refuses, she has a fit of frustration, and then this back and forth occurs.
Then why did you come back here? I apologize. It isn't my place to ask that. Everything is my fault. I shouldn't have gotten you or Akihiko involved.
Cut that out. I'm the one who chose to join you back then. However things turned out after that has nothing to do with you. I didn't know what I was capable of. That's all there is to it.
Then why are you so determined not to return to school? You'll be throwing your future away if you don't go back. Right. I apologize. I was out of line. I don't plan on forcing you into anything, like I did in the past. What's important is it's your own decision, Aragaki.
Looks like you have changed. Just a little bit. You always used to avoid relying on people. Not so much of a lone wolf anymore, huh?
The only choice we have is to keep moving forward. That goes for myself, Akihiko, and you. So please, Aragaki, just give it another chance.
This is a massive change in tone and attitude from Mitsuru, because like Shinji said, she used to be a lot more forceful, and this is shown not even that long ago where she would pressure people to join S.E.E.S and fight against the shadows. Now though, after hearing her father's words and taking small steps to bond with everyone more since the Yakushima beach trip, she can better understand where and when she's going wrong and makes attempts to keep herself in check and to not be as lonesome. In Linked Episode 3, we get to see why she's so regretful and pushy on wanting Shinji to return to school. When it was just the three of them exploring Tartarus, even though they hardly made any progress, it gave them all a purpose and a chance to bond together. The main reason she wants him to enroll so badly is because they all made a promise to graduate together, and Mitsuru, as shown previously, partly blames herself for what happened to Shinji. Since she was the leader of the team back then, it's only natural she'd feel an obligation to look out for Akihiko and Shinji, and to see him isolate himself and basically kill himself over what happened under her discretion is something that would stick in anyone's mind. She was being so forceful because she truly does care for Shinji, and this dynamic that Reload added between the original team members makes Mitsuru's character infinitely better in my opinion. In the original game, while it's clear Mitsuru did care for Shinji, I think the added context and actual lore for them not only makes the backstory of the entire game better, but also the backstory of not only Mitsuru, but Shinji and Akihiko as well. It shows how much Mitsuru is starting to really change, and it makes the pacing and writing of her character arc a lot better in my eyes, and it also makes the next event in the story much more tragic than it already was for Mitsuru's character. The October 4th full moon is a date I have mentioned and probably will mention on every single analysis video, but it's extra important for Mitsuru. Just in case you aren't aware of what happens on this date in-game, the team are on another operation to defeat the Strength and Fortune Arcana shadows, and the way it's portrayed is different in both the movies and the games. But in this case, I actually want to go over both since they represent Mitsuru way differently from each other. So in both depictions, while the team are out fighting the shadows, Ken and Shinji are having a confrontation on their own, and Ken plans to kill Shinji for killing his mother. The difference between the movies and the games is when the others are made aware of what's going on. In the game version, it's only after they defeat the shadows and return to the dorm that Mitsuru makes the connection that Ken is probably out to kill Shinji as they speak. And to be honest, I really do not think this is in character for her at all, especially in Reload. This was by far one of the weirdest plot points for me in the game because I find it very hard to believe that Mitsuru, after slowly becoming closer to everyone and understanding Shinji's situation better than basically anyone, as shown in the linked episodes, didn't have even the slightest inkling that something was going on when Ken and Shinji just so happened to be the only ones missing on the anniversary of the day Ken's mom was killed. Now she claims she was focused on the operation, but I don't know, this just seems far-fetched. In defense of this depiction, because I want to be fair, this could demonstrate how Mitsuru is still not aware of what goes on around her in regards to other people since she really doesn't understand the group entirely and puts the work of the group above all else. It would make sense considering the fact her ultimate goal is to end the Dark Hour so her father and herself can have some relief from the situation. Since, as I mentioned a while before, he has never been the same since the Dark Hour came to be, and she had Persona essentially forced upon her to save him. Even then though, I don't really like the way the game handled it because it does seem a bit far-fetched. Throughout the entire game, while Mitsuru isn't wholly aware of where everyone is mentally, she makes it a priority to be there for them and to make sure they're okay, as I've pointed out many times before. But I would like to hear what you all think and if you agree with me or not. In regards to the movie adaptation, I think this represents Mitsuru and Akihiko in a way better light. So as soon as they arrive at the strip mall and prepare to fight the shadows, it's right then and there they realize what's going on, but they get ambushed before they can make their way to them. In this fight, they just barely win after an incredibly hard-fought battle, and immediately rush to them. Unfortunately though, they're too late. Shinji sacrifices himself to save Ken from Takaya, the leader of the rival Persona user group called Shrega. Now put yourself in Mitsuru's shoes here, especially with the added context of the linked episodes in Reload. She held such blame, guilt, and regret for how the situation with Shinji turned out, and now they'll never be able to fulfill the promise they made together, that being to graduate at the same time. Just like everyone else, and to a far greater degree, this event would change how Mitsuru views the work the group does and the stakes that are at hand, and it would also help her to value the bond she currently has to an even greater degree. And unfortunately for Mitsuru, things don't get much better for her, at all. After the death of Shinji, she still regrets everything, and this is shown by the conversation she has with Yukari on October 24th. Yukari asks her what her reason for fighting is, and in Mitsuru's own words, she says, "It's my way of atoning for the past." And this could be referring to a couple of things. First and foremost, it's obviously referring to her family's involvement in causing everything and how it affected her father, but could also refer to Shinji's death now. Either way, it shows she's still stuck in the past after all this time. She does receive some closure during the final Shinji linked episode though. As the protagonist goes to Shinji's room to clean things out, he finds the re-enrollment form filled out at his desk. Mitsuru happens to see this, and it shows her that even though he was going through the things he still had her, Akihiko, and their promise in the back of their mind. This definitely was able to give her some closure on the matter, which is much needed because the next event doesn't get any easier for her. Moving onward to the next full moon operation is the supposed last major arcana shadow they'll need to defeat before ending the Dark Hour. And once they complete this goal, they decide to have a celebration party, and Mitsuru's father decides to show up as well. And then the Dark Hour doesn't end. Truly shocking. With my sarcasm aside, this does lead to the biggest moment for Mitsuru's entire character arc. It's revealed not too long after that Akutsuki tricked everyone into defeating the shadows to bring upon the fall, and he then takes Aigis and Mitsuru's father hostage and essentially crucifies everyone else. What happens after? Well...
No! Please, Aigis, don't! Father... Father! Father! Father. My father once made a promise. He swore he would atone for putting our generation in danger even if it cost him his life. But I wanted him to live. I became a Persona user so I could protect him.
Now that Mitsuru's father has been killed, right before her very eyes nonetheless, there are several things that occur. For one, she's lost all reason to continue fighting against the shadows, not only for the sole fact that everything they were working toward was for nothing, but also she failed at her main goal of protecting her father. Secondly, the Kirijo group are now slowly appointing her as the main leader, which means she's going to have even more responsibilities forced upon her than she had before, all during the lowest point she's ever been at. All the way until the Kyoto trip, she would isolate herself from everyone more than ever before. And at this time, she's basically just running through the motions for her group. She doesn't want to do it, but she knows she has to do it. She isolates herself to such a severe degree that she even planned on skipping the Kyoto trip initially, which would have been quite remarkable considering she's a student council president and all, but also a very understandable stance to want to take. It isn't until Yukari of all people comes to her aid and convinces her that she should come. In case you haven't watched my Yukari analysis, the reason she feels so connected to Mitsuru in this moment despite all the negative thoughts she's had for her throughout the game is because she's gone through the same thing Mitsuru has. They both lost their father figures, and Yukari had also lost her will to fight after learning the supposed truth about her father during the experiments. Even though they are so different, Yukari understands what she's going through better than absolutely anyone else possibly could, and since she has a good heart, she's there for her. And because of that, Mitsuru finds it in herself to go on the class trip alongside everyone else. With that being said though, she's far from okay still. She still distances herself from those around her. That is until the afternoon on November 18th. Yukari sees Mitsuru by herself on the riverbank, so she goes and speaks with her. Part of me wants to just play this entire scene, but I can't really do that, so I'll summarize a bit of it. Mitsuru comes off pretty defensive and rude at first by saying they have no reason to be with each other anymore since they failed to end the Dark Hour and have no objective. She then admits that the whole reason she fought in the first place was solely to protect her father, not so much to make up for what her grandfather had done 10 years prior, which is what I've kind of been alluding to the whole time more or less. And now I'll let the characters speak for themselves.
Sorry, but we don't know that for sure yet. At that point, believing in my dad was all I had.
Your father only did what he thought was best.
He was involved in dangerous work, but in the end, he fought to make things right. He believed the shadows needed to be stopped, even if it meant losing his life. That's why I choose to fight. I'm going to destroy the Dark Hour and finish what my dad started.
Finish what he started.
That's all I can do. That we can do, right, Mitsuru-senpai?
Takeba. You're right. It's not over just yet. We're going to see this through to the end, for my father's sake, and for yours.
Senpai.
Yukari. Let's face what comes next together, okay?
Of course.
You don't need to worry, Father. I'm not alone. And I won't turn back anymore.
After having Yukari be there for her in her troubling time, Mitsuru awakens to Artemisia and resolves to fight against the Dark Hour for her late father and her friend's sakes, and also resolves to look onward and never look back as she has been doing for the majority of the game. Artemisia was a queen of the ancient Greek city-state of Helicarnassus, which is in present-day Turkey. As said in Reload, during the Persian Wars between the Greek states and Persia, she was the only woman to take command in the Persian fleet. Her taking command of the fleet as a woman can be represented by her new expectation to be the head of the Kirijo group in her father's steps, and it can also show her newfound resolve and determination to do so. Before, she was just going through the motions because she had to, but now she doesn't mind it as much and wants to continue her father's legacy. She's also the very first female leader of the group, so there's an obvious connection there. Artemisia was an incredible fleet commander, as you would presume as well. Before the Battle of Salamis, all the naval commanders came together for a meeting on whether to have a naval battle against the Greeks, and she was the only one to go against it. Her king was impressed, but resolved to proceed with the fight anyway. During this fight, she showed great bravery, skill, and trickery to put up a better fight against the Greeks than basically anyone else. She would use Persian colors mostly, but if her ship began getting attacked by the Greeks, then she would change the colors to the ones the Greeks used and pursue a Persian ship to confuse them. She was easily the best fighter on that day, and her king even admitted that himself, saying she acted more manly than the men on the fleet. So what does this have to do with Mitsuru? Well, I think it's quite obvious. She's living in a world and society where men are unfortunately seen as superior to women. Yet despite that, she's kicking ass by being the essential mother of S.E.E.S, and she's now the head of the Kirijo group basically, as I mentioned a moment ago. Not many people could replicate what she's doing no matter the status, gender, or whatever, and she takes some pride in that and vows to do the right thing for herself, her friends, and her late father. Her becoming closer to everyone, like the protagonist in Yukari, gives her the strength she needs to stand up for herself and what she wants as well, which I'll detail in the social link portion of this video. To sum up what I'm saying, Mitsuru's awakening is basically a rebirth of herself and what she is. Not too dissimilar from the rest of the cast, since that's the entire point. After her father died and she became closer to Yukari, you could see this as the death of her old self, or Penthesilea, who was slain by Achilles, and the birth of the person she would be from then onward in the form of Artemisia, who actually did manage to survive that naval battle and put up a better fight than anyone else. Since they're very similar in a lot of ways, I think this makes a lot of sense and fits her. And that's more or less all I want to cover regarding her ultimate persona. So now we can lead into what is basically the climax of the narrative on December 3rd. In case you aren't aware of what happens here, Ryoji, a good friend of the protagonist and Junpei, came to be after they defeated all of the 12 major shadows, and now that he is present, the fall is imminent. S.E.E.S are given two options for this dilemma. They can either kill Ryoji and forget everything, or fight Nyx until the very end. Everyone copes with this in different ways, and the way Mitsuru copes with it is to look at everything formally and logically, similarly to how she did earlier in the game, but a lot more grim with the context. On December 10th, they are all having a meeting to go over what they believe they should do regarding Ryoji, and after a massive fight breaks out, they all decide they need more time, and Mitsuru suggests they should spend some time away from each other. As shown in the study session a few days later, however, she regrets saying that. If they truly have limited time to spend together left, then they should make every second count. I think this moment puts Mitsuru in a much better light because the only possible way they were going to get through something as terrifying as facing death is to stick together. And having a cordial study session is exactly what they needed. And the fact she realized this on her own shows just how much she actually has changed. For the icing on the cake for this point, on December 20th, Mitsuru herself actually comes on her own to Yukari's room to talk to her about everything. Very rarely does she do things like this throughout the game, so this shows just how much she has come to trust Yukari as a friend, something she never would have done before the events of the game. As they talk about how they feel regarding whether to fight Nyx or not, Mitsuru shares the conclusion she's come to.
I've made my decision as well. The Kirijo group is slowly regaining its footing. After I graduate, the plan is for me to eventually take over as leader. Turning back was never really an option for me.
But what if you die?
If we can defeat Nyx and I die in the process, then the company will continue on without me, and I'm confident they'd carry on my wishes.
Honestly, I don't think it matters if we live or die. All that really matters is that we're proud of how we lived. And I know I'd be proud if we decided to fight Nyx.
Is this about honoring your father's legacy?
Yeah, that's part of it. But mostly, it's about me and how I feel.
I understand.
Senpai, a while back, you asked me to face what comes next with you. You didn't forget, did you?
I could never forget. We'll fight together, Yukari.
Good.
So after everything that has happened with Shinji's death, her father's death, her new responsibilities, her friendships, the fall, and everything, Mitsuru has gone from a sheltered, disconnected, and pretty cold person to a mature person that values her friends over essentially all else. She has realized what her father meant by what he said at Yakushima. She has realized all of her shortcomings and more or less rectified them, and she has become basically unrecognizable from the person she once was. The last thing I need to go over to prove all I've said and wrap up her story through the journey is her social link. Her social link is the nice bow on top of everything I've been reiterating and focuses on her attempts to balance the work of the Kirijo group with her own personal life and those around her. Since she was basically forced into her position, she has some doubts about becoming the head of the group, and a big part of her wants to run away from it all. Throughout many of the early social link levels, Mitsuru asks you for help with eating in more casual establishments, like the ramen shop Akihiko and Shinji used to frequent, and the Wild Duck Burger, which is basically McDonald's. Since she has been of such high status all of her life, she doesn't know how to act in these kinds of environments, so she asks the protagonist for help. Now, I'm not throwing shade to Mitsuru here because this is just funny, but the fact she won't ask you for help on how to eat ramen noodles until you're classified as a genius is pretty damn funny. Alongside asking you for help on these tasks though, she does bring up important topics. For example, during rank 2, while eating at McDonald's, she makes it a point to thank you for being a good friend and ally, and says the only reason they've made it as far as they have is because they have each other. This isn't too far after everything with her father in Kyoto happened, so it's clear to see those two moments in her life led her to be more appreciative of those around her, leading her to do things like this out of her own goodwill. In rank 3 though, is when things with Mitsuru herself start to get real. She brings up how much Akihiko has changed for the better, and once she says this, she admits she's anxious because she feels as if she's being left behind. And this is elaborated upon in rank 4. She talks about how she has a marriage that is going to be arranged for her and shows clear disdain for the thought of it. But since it's for her company, she feels as though she has no way out. Since the death of her father, the group has been in a rough position, and this marriage would be beneficial to the company in the long run. In rank 5, she expresses in greater detail how she feels about her life at the moment. After going to the movies with the protagonist, she explains the main reason she got a motorcycle, which is the one she uses during the Dark Hour. She got it as a small act of rebellion against the restrictions of her life. This is the first time she opens up about wanting to run away from everything, and this mindset would be present for every subsequent rank going forward. During rank 6, she shares the fact that a fiance has been chosen for her, and he's a fucking dickhead. Well, she didn't say that part, but that's probably what she was thinking. She clearly hates the very thought of it, but since all she's ever really known as far as the company goes is to put it above all else, she agrees to go forward with it. She feels like it's her fate to walk the same path her father and mother did, but once the protagonist stepped into her life, her feelings began to change even more. In rank 7, her appreciation and feelings for the protagonist become even more clear when she asks to spend more time together, and that the memories they've made together have helped her a lot, and will continue to do so in the future. Rank 8 though, is when shit gets really real. And I actually think this is one of the longest, if not the longest, social link rank in the entire game. It's almost 8 minutes. For transparency, the footage I recorded in my playthrough of the game, I was on the romance path for Mitsuru, but everything is more or less the same in the platonic route, bar the mentions of love. With that said, the first couple of minutes of this rank are more about Mitsuru's frustrations with everything put onto her, and she says these things are holding her back, and she wishes she didn't have to deal with it anymore. After she vents those frustrations, she asks for a hypothetical situation where she loves someone but can't tell them or be with them. Would that be okay to feel? Of course, any person with half a heart would choose the option that it's up to you, and this strikes Mitsuru. Since she has always just followed orders and never really stood up for herself like that, hearing someone say that you can make your own choices and decisions probably felt like sort of a shell shock to her. And just as she hears that, her fucking dusty ass, bitch ass, mark ass fiance pulls up trying to order her around and act like she has to do everything he says. At first, Mitsuru is willing to go along with it even though it's complete bullshit, but then this happens, and I'm gonna let this whole scene play out cause fuck this dumbass prick. Also, it's just important for her character.
There's a world of difference between you and us. Mitsuru, take care not to associate with his kind anymore.
Enough.
Mitsuru?
I said that's enough! I won't let you insult him!
What? Why are you getting so angry?
This is someone I have a great deal of respect for. If you insult him, you insult me!
Mitsuru? What are you saying? You would side with him over me?
You said there was a world of difference between you and him. Well, you're right. You can't compare to him at all. He stands on his own 2 feet, challenging fate with his own strength of will. Seeing his outlook on life has inspired and influenced me countless times. I want to be with him. Now. And forever.
You want to be with him? Now and forever? What are you trying to say? You're supposed to be my fiancé. Are you implying I'm beneath this nobody? Take that back this instant, Mitsuru! It's not too late to ask for forgiveness. Think about the future of your company.
I will not apologize. I want to be with him. You're not the one supporting me in my time of need. The group will do just fine on its own. We don't need help from a weasel like you. As of today, we'll have nothing to do with each other. And if you dare to attempt some petty retaliation, then next time you'll have the full might of the group to contend with. Get out of here, you Philistine! I don't want to see your face ever again!
Grandpa! Grandpa!
Bro, look at this fucking bum running away. I swear, bro, if I was the protagonist, I'd uppercut his shit so many times it would look like he was nodding yes on some hops and shit. I hate this dude the way Kendrick hates Drake on God.
I hate the way that you walk, the way that you talk. I hate the way that you dress.
All right. My hating antics aside, this actually is huge for Mitsuru because this is the first time she stood up for herself into the unfair reality of her situation. She didn't want to marry this guy, and she finally found the courage to put a stop to it with the help of Makoto, and now she'll never have to worry about him or his bullshit ever again. In rank 9, going off the romantic route since that's what I chose, she formally announces her love for the protagonist. that's the most important thing really, but it does show how she's become more comfortable around him and how she's learned to be less formal when it comes to certain things. In rank 10 though, she says now that she has found the courage to stand up for herself, she doesn't want to or feel a need to run away from her future anymore, and she wants to continue making good memories with the protag and everyone else. So to summarize Mitsuru's social link, she initially shares confusion on how to behave and act in common establishments like fast food joints and asks for help. She then gets more comfortable with the protagonist and vents her frustrations regarding her place in the Kirijo group to him, saying she wants to do things like run away and how she doesn't want to go through with her arranged marriage because she doesn't love the person she's going to be with, which is what she values above all else in a relationship. By the end of it though, with the help of the protagonist, she understands that it's possible to stand up for herself, and not for the sake of the company, but for herself and the one she cares for. This is so big because as shown during the Shinji linked episodes, she says the decisions you make should be yours alone, and if she hadn't stood up for herself, she would have been going against her own personal beliefs. Really, her running away from her problems and going along with what she was told to do went against everything she believed in general. So her going against it shows she has changed truly, and not just through the protagonist's help of course, but through everything. Her father would have only wanted what's best for her, and I'm sure he would have encouraged her to do what she did, and I think that's amazing. So let's go ahead and summarize how Mitsuru has changed before we get into the finale of the journey part of the narrative. Mitsuru went from having basically no connections to those around her bar Akihiko and relying solely on herself to becoming best friends with the rest of S.E.E.S, especially Yukari and the protagonist. She went from valuing the work of the team in the fight against the Dark Hour over everything to realizing in the end she wants to fight for her friends, her father, and her own sake. She went from being stuck regretting the past to looking forward to a brighter future now that she has taken control of her life. In general, she's basically the polar opposite of all the shortcomings she had as a character in person, and besides what happened on October 4th, I think her writing is pretty damn great. That's all I have to say regarding the journey chapter of her character arc, so we can head into the final battle against Nyx. Just like everyone else, Mitsuru's will and heart are on fire and they're determined to win at all costs. There's not too much I'd like to point out for Mitsuru in particular for this final fight besides a few interactions, like this interaction between herself and Yukari in the movie adaptation.
Yukari, まだいけるな。Mitsuru先輩こそしっかりしてくださいよ。当たり前だ。
And of course, I'd be a fool not to mention the hard-hitting line she says as Makoto fights Nyx on his own.
Give him strength! Take my life if you must!
That's all I want to mention for the Judgment Day, actually. It's just a good demonstration of where Mitsuru is at the end of the day and how far she's come. After they emerge victorious, they all forget their memories, so the game skips onward to March. On March 4th, as the protagonist says his final goodbyes to everyone, he speaks with Mitsuru as well. This is more or less further confirmation that Mitsuru isn't going to run away from her life anymore, and that she appreciates Makoto dearly for everything he did for her. And of course, March 5th arrives, but I'm actually going to let Mitsuru's speech play out since it's actually very relevant to this analysis, and it better than I even could summarizes her character arc up to this point.
That's right. After my father died, there was a time I lost motivation to live my life, but no longer. I shall honor my father's will. I won't run from the future. I'll face it head on. Not a single doubt remains in my mind. And the reason...
Our promise!
It's because I have forged such wonderful friendships. And we swore that we would never lose hope, no matter what the future may bring.
Senpai! We remembered him, and Aigis!
Yes, I did as well. Let's go. They're waiting.
After that, well, I believe we all know how this goes, so as I usually do, I'll let a small portion of the ending play out before we head into the answer portion of this video. In case you aren't aware of how the ending of Persona 3 goes, the protagonist passes away on the rooftop soon after they all remember their promise to meet on the roof. And for each and every single major character in this game, this is a massive moment for their character arcs. In Mitsuru's case, think about it this way. The very person who helped you break through your isolation, the very same person who helped you take your life into your own hands, and the person that helped you understand yourself and the world better has passed away before your very eyes. Now, I don't know about y'all, but that would be enough to break most people. And this very plot point is what leads to the events of The Answer. Truthfully, there really isn't too much I need to talk about regarding Mitsuru in The Answer, bar one major plot point, that being her loyalty to Yukari. Since Yukari was there for Mitsuru in her absolute darkest time, Mitsuru decides to do the same for Yukari here. But before I get into that, let me at least give a small rundown of the situation. The Answer takes place on March 31st, so not too long after the protagonist had passed away. Everyone is preparing to leave the dorm now that their purposes as S.E.E.S has been fulfilled, and everyone holds regret for how everything ended up with the protag's passing, and Mitsuru was no exception. She tries to gather everyone's evokers as a way of regretting the past, and the main reason everyone laments his passing is because they not only miss him and he was the only casualty, but they don't know what the cause of death even was. Even the doctors couldn't figure it out. As a result of their regret, a new dungeon beneath the dorm opens called the Abyss of Time, and as they make their way further into the dungeon, they eventually are given a dilemma. They can either go back in time to before the protagonist had died, or they continue living their lives in the present as normal. The main issue here, however, is that everyone collectively has to choose the same option, and this leads to the main conflict of the storyline. To sum things up, Yukari wants to go back in time to before the protagonist died, while everyone else wants to continue onward in the present, and this does actually include Mitsuru. With that said, however, when they come to the conclusion to fight for the right on which door to open, Mitsuru does actually side with Yukari. Again, this isn't because she thinks she's in the right, but it's because she vowed to be on her side no matter what, just as she was there for her. Now obviously this in the grand scheme of things is such a dumb fucking idea it's unreal, but it's way more believable than something like the October 4th operation. Even though this does go against a lot of her growth throughout the journey, which is the point of The Answer, might I remind everyone, that doesn't make it bad, I really don't think this is far-fetched for Mitsuru to do. Yukari saved her life basically, so in her eyes she feels indebted and expected to stand by her side. That's how much their bond together means to her. When they are defeated by Aigis and Metis, Yukari continues to express her regret and sorrow, but then Mitsuru is there to comfort her. Normally I wouldn't let something this long play out, but it is very important and it's the final hurrah to Mitsuru's character arc. Take a look.
Yukari, there's no way to truly put the past behind you. In the end, you only succeed in running from it. It's painful to face, but if you don't, your wounds will never heal.
So if I keep facing it, someday everything will be okay? Eventually I'll forget all about him, or stop caring? Like that's ever gonna happen. No one knows that better than us.
You're right. But can't we be there for you when things are at their worst? The way you were there for me last year.
Huh?
That may not have been what you meant at the time, but even now, I consider your being at my side last year as one of the most cherished moments of my life. That's why, when we lost him without being able to thank him, I swore deep down, if something ever happened to make you suffer, I'd put my own feelings aside and stand with you.
Mitsuru-senpai.
Yukari, to lose someone you had such a strong bond with is agony, but there's no need to suffer alone. You have us with you. Isn't that the whole point of forming such bonds?
Like I mentioned a moment ago, Mitsuru values Yukari to such an incredible degree, and held such regret for the passing of the protagonist that she was willing to set aside her own pride and feelings just to help her. Now seriously, just think about the first few months of Persona 3 for a second. Yukari didn't like Mitsuru at all, and it was because of her coldness, but look at the two of them now. In terms of friendship and bonds, I don't think it gets much deeper than Yukari and Mitsuru. at least as far as Persona 3 goes. There is no chance in hell that the two of them would have been friends, let alone to this degree early on in both of their character arcs. But through all of the trials and tribulations they went through together, and all the effort they put into understand each other better and appreciate each other better, they were able to make this unlikely, unbreakable bond with one another that pushes the two of them to look forward to their lives, rather than regretting the past as the both of them had been doing all this time. There are two things I'll go over before getting to the summary of this whole analysis. The first being the final battle against Erebus. Erebus is the manifestation of mankind's desires to bring upon Nyx and the Fall, and everyone in S.E.E.S had at least some stake in bringing it on. Before they all resolve to fight it together, Mitsuru says this.
This is a battle we can't run from. The feelings that gave birth to this abomination were inside me as well. Because I couldn't accept reality, I foolishly sought solace in a past filled with death and strife. There's no mistaking it. This monster is the reason for all our troubles.
Then, not too long after they return to the present day and Aigis wakes back up, she says this.
About collecting everyone's evoker. I'm thinking of calling that off. Our ordeal has given me a lot of food for thought. My own way of running away may have been to try to collect these and put them away, forever. But even if there are no shadows left, the battle against ourselves is ongoing. Each of you should hold on to yours.
To be honest, I don't see any need to go in depth on how these things Mitsuru says here are important because it's so blatantly obvious at this point, so I feel comfortable getting into the summary section of this video. I've hammered these points in so hard at this point that I feel it's crazy, but just for the one time I'll do it again. Mitsuru at the start of Persona 3 was very cold, forceful, and isolated. She didn't have true bonds or connections to anyone besides Akihiko and to an extent Shinji. She fought solely to defeat the Dark Hour and to protect her father. And while these are noble ambitions, it led to her being blinded to what was going on around her. She didn't think about the implications bestowing this burden onto the others would have, and while it wasn't done with ill intent and there was no bad blood between her or the others, for the most part, it did show her blindness and one-track mind. As the events of the game progressed, Mitsuru began to see more clearly the things she had been doing wrong. Now let me be fair, not everything she did was bad. She had great leadership abilities and always had the best in mind for those around her. She tried to make sure everyone got good grades, slept well, stayed healthy, and all that good jazz. Not everyone is perfect, that's the whole point of the game, and Mitsuru's character arc focuses on someone trying to be perfect when it's not possible. She tried to solve everything on her own and believes she could do so, but it's impossible. She realized this to be true through several instances in the game, the most obvious being her friendship with Yukari and social link with the protagonist, but also less blatantly when she asked Fuka for help on getting information from the Kirijo group about the experiments her grandfather had conducted. Through every trial and tribulation that was thrust upon her, most obviously being the death of her father, it was the bonds she had with everyone that kept her going. Without Yukari's kindness and the protagonist's thoughtfulness, she most likely never would have progressed the way she did. She would have continued to regret the death of Shinji and her father, she would have continued to want to run away from her life, and she never would have found the strength to look forward in life. She understands this so well by the end of her character arc that she even vowed to stand by Yukari in a situation as dire as the events of The Answer. I think it is quite remarkable how much she actually changed when you put it into the grand scheme of things. Since Mitsuru was so reserved and mature from start to finish, it can be a little hard to see how far she came at times, but when you really look at it in the grand picture of things, she had just as much growth and change as anyone else in the group. While I'm obviously not heir to a massive corporation like the Kirijo group, I can sort of relate to Mitsuru and her wanting to be this perfect being that can thug out life all by herself. That's honestly a problem I had for a long time where I just refused to ask for help when it came to certain things, and it resulted in a lot of unnecessary hardship that in all honesty could have been avoided, and it's something I still struggle with to this day. She's actually more human of a character than she seems at first glance considering her status and upbringing, but I suppose this is just another one of those cases of not judging a book by its cover, eh? With all of that said though, I believe it's going to do it for my in-depth analysis of Mitsuru Kirijo from Persona 3. Was there anything I missed that you think I should have added? How do you feel about Mitsuru as a character? Can you relate to her and the things she went through? Do you agree with my overall assessment and understanding of her character? I want to hear what you all think, so as always, I'll be trying my best to reply to every comment on this video. I don't want to take any more of your time, but if you enjoyed the video, please consider dropping a like and a subscribe. It helps the channel out a lot, and I'll love you forever. It's been your boy Yandere Gogeta, and I will see you in the next video. Peace out, and have a great day.